Good evening. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Canastota School Board on October 13th, 2020. May I please have you stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Apologize for being a few minutes late. Fire exits are located in the places I'm indicating for the people who are here. In the event of a fire alarm, will sound. If this occurs, please move immediately in a calm and orderly manner to the nearest exit. Routine matters. Resolved upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board does hereby approve the following routine matters. The Board of Education minutes September 8th and September 29th, 2020. May I please have a motion? Lauren?
Second.
Kathleen? Any questions, comments, discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Approved. This is our first public comment period. If anybody would like to speak, this is your opportunity. There is another one at the end also. Okay. We have a couple of presentations this evening. We're going to start out with our audit presentation by Mr. Pat Powers of D'Arcangelo. Okay, Pat, you're up. Am I taking that? We're going to take it from here. We got all the fancy stuff. Yeah. Whoever you want. There you go. People at home. People at home.
Okay.
Yeah, we were streaming this live.
Great. All right, thank you. Thank you for having me here tonight. I'm here to report on the annual independent audit on the financial statements of the district for the year ended June 30th, 2020. We did complete our audit. I met with the audit committee, discussed a lot of the numbers, the details in the report for about an hour before this meeting. We do have a draft for you tonight, so I ask that after the meeting, you take a look at the report. If you have any changes or anything you have questions on, please give me a call. Len Carissimo was the engagement partner on the job. I was the concurring partner. And what I'm going to do tonight is just go over some of the highlights of the report for you. And then, as I said, if you have any questions, we'd be glad to take those, or you can give us a call, before we go final with the report. On top, there's a news release from the Office of Budget that I handed out. I just wanted to mention that because of the 20% holdback in state aid that they have done and they're proposing to do on future state aid payments, they're allowing you to extend your bond anticipation to borrow monies from certain reserves, but you have to pay it back over a 5-year period. I told the audit committee, and they actually told me, it doesn't help you with your revenue side of your budget. It's just borrowing money from reserves that are already there. It would help your cash flow in the event you need that if they take 20% holdback on future aid payments. So not a huge help at all to school districts because it's not gonna supply revenues to your budget. So I also handed out a one-page report from the state fiscal stress, and I did update the numbers for 2020. I did not print out all the charts that go with that because the program they have is not updated yet. But I would just point out that you have all zeros there, which indicates no fiscal stress in all the categories: cash liquidity, fund balance, debt. So no fiscal stress, which is good news for the school district, especially if you're going to go out to borrow monies. And I know you have a capital project. We just did borrow last year in 2019, but you're going to be borrowing again. And they do look at these things, so the bonding people. So that's the best score you can get is a 0. What I want to do tonight is just go over the executive summary, which is this document. Below that is our bound report, the large document. I will make reference to some page numbers in that, so I just ask you to make a note on the executive summary. So later on, if you want to go back and look, you can find those readily. But as I said, we did go through a lot of the detail with the audit committee, so I'm just going to go through the executive summary, and then if there's any questions, please just interrupt me or raise your hand. On page 1, communication with those charged with governance. We are required to issue a report to those charged with governance, which would be the school board and the audit committee, because of certain audit failures in the past where the communications were not given to the board. So we are required to issue this letter to you, and it breaks out significant accounting estimates that we use in the financial statements, and that being your other post-employee benefit liability, your compensated absences accrual, depreciation on your fixed assets, and there are some estimates for your employees and your teacher retirement system that we use on the government-wide financial statements. So they're outlined in there. We go over your significant accounting policies, we go over the estimates in the financials, accounting disclosures, and they're all consistent and in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles. There were no real difficulties encountered during the audit. You didn't consult with another auditor or accountant during the course of the engagement if you didn't like our procedures or our rulings on certain accounting issues. You know, like the deferral of the state aid, we did defer 20% of your BOCES aid and your excess cost aid payments, about $230,000 at the end of the year. We did defer that, which really means we did not recognize it as revenue, and we're not going to until it's collected. So it's deferred on your books. No disagreements with management, and we did get a representation from management that they disclosed everything that we were looking for in the course of the audit. They didn't hide anything from us or our staff during the course of the engagement. So that's a clean letter. One thing I would point out, we did have a comment in the prior year on the uniform guidance, the federal compliance. If you remember last year, we did comment that you had to update your procedures on the uniform guidance, and you did do that during 1920. So we took that comment out. There are no comments in the report this year, so a clean report. In the bound document, pages 1 and 2, the next item on it says basic financial statements, is our independent auditor's report on the financials. It's what we call an unmodified opinion or a clean opinion on the financials for the year ended June 30th, 2020. And it is a clean opinion, which is the best you can get. No qualifications in that report. It's in conformity with generally accepted auditing standards and accounting principles issued by the U.S. Government Accounting Office and generally accepted accounting principles. So a clean opinion, no comments, which is the best you can do. And as I said about the required communications, if you go out to a bonding person or even sometimes for your insurance, they'll ask for an audit report and they're looking for that unmodified opinion, which is a good report. So no matters to report there. We also issue a report on internal control over financial reporting and compliance. And that shows up on page 53 of the large document. So there's a lot of pages there. No material instances of non-compliance and nothing to report in that letter. So once again, a clean opinion on internal control over financial reporting and compliance. If you go to page 2 of the executive summary, we did have a single audit this year, but you do receive federal monies over $750,000. Actually, you received $1,654,000. No material instances of non-compliance and no material internal control weaknesses. So we do separate tests on your federal programs. We have to test compliance, overall general compliance and specific compliance for the federal programs that we picked. And we did the special education cluster about $364,000, which was 22% of your federal expenditures. We are required to audit at least 20% of those expenditures because you are a low-risk, what we call a low-risk auditee, which just means we have not had any findings in the past and you have pretty low-risk audit federal programs. High risk would have to do 40% of expenditures. So what we did 22% and we had no findings in your single audit. I would point out here, you had two programs, the New York State Education Department, which is the federal Title I's, the ESEA monies. We also get money from the Department of Agriculture in the form of school lunch reimbursements. And your federal school lunch reimbursements increased quite a bit this year to $647,000 from $376,000 due to the COVID and the delivery of lunches for really 7 days a week to, I believe Mr. Panuccio mentioned, anybody under age 18. So distributed quite a few lunches during the winter and into the spring and summer. So the federal reimbursement came in and that increased your Department of Agriculture monies, federal aid. So there was a profit in the school lunch fund this year, primarily due to that. Next item is the Extra Classroom Activity Fund, and there is a separate report. There's actually three reports on the extra classroom. We did cite one deficiency there, internal control over initial cash receipts, which we have cited every year. We do that simply because we cannot rely on the tests of the initial sale and the internal controls over those sales of all the activities that go on, selling items, car washes, bake sales, those kind of things. It's very hard to get an internal control to test and to rely on to issue an audit report. And that you should know that's a standalone audit report. So the materiality level is quite low when we issue an opinion. The extra classroom ended up with about $100,000 in cash at the end of the year. It was kind of a short year because of the COVID. A lot of activities were curtailed or weren't run, but still had activities that had to be audited and reported on. We issue the same report on all of our districts and BOCES, so there has been improvement over the years. Unfortunately, this year we weren't able to come in and speak to the advisors and the student treasurers. We've been doing that for a number of years here, and I have seen improvements in the documentation and the overall attitude of accountability that's there. So we'll get back at it again once this COVID is gone. So. The financial statements, and I'm not going to go through all the pages in the financials, but pages 3 to 12 are our management discussion. Those are your government-wide financial statements. It includes all of your fixed assets, all of your long-term debt. The biggest liability in there would be your OPEB, your other post-employee benefit liability, which was $77,876,000 at the end of the year, an increase of about $19 million over the prior year. And that creates a deficit on the government-wide financials. The reason the big increase over the prior year went up about $19 million was the discount rate dropped from 3.5 to 2.2%, which means they're not earning as much on their money. The interest rates are dropping. You cannot get any money in the bank today if you go out and get a CD. There are no interest rates really. So that increases the liability going forward. And it happened on all of our districts because you hire an actuary to come up with those numbers. It's based on the discount rate, mortality tables, medical trend rates, the age of your population, number of retirees. There's a lot of things that go into that number, but it's on your government-wide and it creates a deficit. And I would say most of our districts have deficits on a government-wide because of that OPEB liability. And that was about $77 million at the end of the year. They did defer some of that in what we call deferred outflow, and that's in the government-wide. That was about $18 million. So about $4 million of that increase hit your expenses in the government-wide. The important thing I think to note about OPEB is you cannot fund it. So that liability, there's no way to put money set aside to help fund that expense. It's not due tomorrow. It's not like an accounts payable where you have to come up with that cash. It's payable over time. Your current operating expense for the OPEB is about $1.8 million a year, actual payments going out for retirees' health insurance. So And that number could change. If interest rates go up and the discount rate goes up, that liability will go down. So you just keep an eye on it. Statement of activities is on page 14. Net expenses government-wide were about 30 million. That's all your funds combined with depreciation and those pension expenses and OPEB. And then on pages 15 to 17 of the report are your governmental funds, your balance sheets, and your income statements. And if you go to the next page, I'm just going to talk about a little bit about some of those numbers, your fund balances on all of your funds at the end of the year at June 30th. We showed 2020 and then 2019. So we start off with general fund. We list all of your reserves there. You can see total restricted fund balance of $7,424,000. They're all in reserves at the end of the year. The largest being a capital reserve of $3,169,000, which will be used for future capital projects. So that money is highly restricted. The other large reserve is your employees' retirement system. You set money aside for future costs for employees' retirement expense. And I would just point out, you know, in the financials, the employees' retirement uses a March year end, so their year end was March 31 of 2020, which was right in the middle of the COVID. Stock market dropped quite a bit. Their financials took quite a large hit in their investment earnings. Most of their money is made through investment earnings. It's not through employee contributions to the pension plan. It took about a $10 billion hit. So your rates are probably it's going to be reflected in your rates over the next 3 to 5 year average that they use. So this is what set some money aside in the employees' contribution reserve to help pay any increases down the road in that expense. So, and that will be probably coming down the road. So total restricted of $7,000,004, assigned fund balance, and when I looked at the report, you assigned $3.2 million of the fund balance to the 2021 operating budget. That's an increase of $1,000,008 over the prior year. Most of that money came from unexpended appropriations in the current year, so we rolled that money over against next year's budget to help reduce taxes. Encumbrances outstanding, so the total assigned fund balance of $3,000,002, left unassigned fund balance of $1,034,000. If you want to make a note, that's 3.8% of your subsequent year's budget. That's the number the state looks at for compliance with the real property tax law at 4%. So they don't want you to exceed 4%, and you're at 3.8% fund balance. School lunch fund, if you look at it, it's $281,000 in fund balance, up from $68,000, so an increase of $213,000, and most of that was from the USDA, the sale of lunches during the COVID. Debt service is money restricted to pay future debt. You see the $1,213,000. We did use $225,000 of that this year to help offset debt service, and that leaves the capital projects with a $90 million operating deficit. As you finance those capital projects, either with money from the capital reserve or borrowing, that deficit will go away. So, any questions on that so far? That's a lot of numbers to throw at you. So, on page 4, and I would write on the top, page 15, that's where this is from in the bound report. We round this to the nearest thousand, but you'll see the big change is in the first line. Cash unrestricted, $4.9 million. It was $13.018 million last year. Then if you go down to liabilities, you'll see due to other funds, $1,314,000 versus $10,480,000. We had a short-term debt outstanding in the capital fund bond anticipation note last year at the end of June 30th, 19. You had already borrowed on the serial bond. You had the cash proceeds held in escrow, and then after July 1, the bond was paid off, the cash was used. So that's why you'll see that big drop in cash, the first line from 19 to 20, and also that big drop in the liability. So it's really a timing on the financing of your capital project that we did at the end of 2019, rolled over into July of 2019. Liabilities of $2,716,000 gives you a fund balance of $7,424,000 restricted, a total of $11,939,000, of which that $1,034 is unassigned, the 3.8%. And then we show some ratios down below. I talked to the audit committee somewhat about your fund equity as a percentage of expenditures at 44%. The average is about 30% in this area for Central New York schools. But you've got to go back and look up at your reserves because that's included in that number. About 12% of your fund balance, that percentage, is in the capital reserve. And another 2% is in the tax tertiary reserve, which are highly restricted reserves. So not all districts have that. If you subtract those out, it brings you down to 30%. So you're pretty much right in line with other districts in Central New York as far as fund balance to expenses. Any questions on that balance sheet? If we go to the next page, we show the last year's revenues and expenditures by category. This is the general fund, primary operating fund of the district. You can look at revenues of $29,065,000 versus $29,137,000, so down about $72,000. But remember, we did defer about $238,000 of state aid, so that's already taken out of that number. State aid and property taxes represent 97% of your revenue in both years. So you're highly dependent on state aid and taxes. If they do go ahead with withholding 20% of state aid, that will have a pretty significant impact on your budget going forward. Expenditures, $26,973,000 versus $28 million, down about $1.9 million. Most of that was in salary expense reductions during the year. You're down about 6.7% in expenditures. So we had an excess revenues of $2,092,000, and we transferred $960,000 of that to other funds. Most of that went into the capital fund for the capital project, the ongoing project. A lot of that money was spent over the summer months. So an increase in fund balance of $11,130,000 over the prior year gives you the ending fund balance, $11,939,000. Budget was, when I look at your revenues versus the budget on page 46, if you want to make a note, revenues were about 1.5% over budget. Expenses about 10.7% under budget. And really, that's where you got the money to appropriate towards the 2021 budget, the $3.2 million. I mean, had you spent the full budget, you wouldn't have had that money to roll into next year's. School lunch revenue, if you want to make a note, $813,000. It's up about $219,000 over the prior year. And as I said before, that's from the delivery of the free lunches, which are reimbursed by the federal government. That's a quick go-through of the report. I know that's a lot to throw at you as far as numbers. I will say I want to thank the board and the administration and the staff for their help during the course of the audit. They're always very cooperative. I did bring a draft tonight, but we can turn this around very quickly and get it into the state. I want to thank you again for engaging us as your external auditor, and I'll be glad to take any questions that you might have. It's a large report. I know you can't wait to take it home and read it, so call me anytime. It's overall, I think, a good report. No comments in any of our audit reports, which is a good thing. No fiscal stress, and you did implement changes to correct the one comment we had last year. So I want to thank you for that. It's okay. You're welcome. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, with that, looking for a motion. Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the board does hereby accept the 2019-2020 audit presented by Pat Powers from D'Arcangelo. May I have a motion? Wes? Lauren? Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Go ahead, submit it. It's going to go. Thank you. Could you bring us pens? Thank you. All right, thanks, Pat. Superintendent Becerra, I'm going to tee this up for you. The next item on our agenda is the district and building goals. And then after that, we're going to have the Phase 2 reopening. So I'm thinking that we're moving.
Yeah,
So I'll let
you want to spin around because we have PowerPoint.
Okay. Thanks again, Pat.
What's that? Okay. Well, anybody who's listened to us for the last year talk about where we want to be as a district knows that we've talked a lot about goals, specifically having specific measurable goals where everybody in our organization is understanding where we're trying to get to, and all of us have a sense of accountability in that process. So tonight we wanted to take you through some of the specific building level goals that are going on in the district to support the larger district mission. These are things that we're not just going to talk about today. We're going to talk about in an ongoing way throughout the year. We're going to be presenting on a quarterly or even at times more frequently than that, depending on need basis, to do a temperature check, so to speak, of where we are in moving towards our goals. So I put this slide up here intentionally because there's a theme developing. We talked about this on the very first day of school with staff. If we really boil down, what do we do? What is the point of what we do at the school? We have to do what we're required to do. And as you know, that takes up a lot of our time, especially in an unusual year, an unusual environment like we have this year. So a lot of our focus tends to be things that we have to do. We have to fill out lots of state reports. We have to do things that sometimes we scratch our head and say, why are we doing this, and is there a purpose? Don't get me wrong. Some things that we have to do, there's a definite purpose and it's important. Some things, I don't know. Sometimes we really wonder, is there a purpose? But we have to do it. The other thing that we have to do, which is the thing that makes, I think, all of us a little more excited to come to work every day, is what are the things that we just should do? What are things that make sense? And one of the things that makes sense, no matter what the state tells us to do, no matter what environment we find ourselves in, it makes sense to do certain things that build a foundation for long-term success for a school district or for any organization. And so that starts with goals. So over time, we've talked, and there's a list. Those are the goal categories that the board had worked on previously, and obviously encompasses a lot of areas ranging from financial, as we're talking to Mr. Powers tonight, walking us through our financial reports. Tonight we're going to spend some time talking about the student achievement and institutional accountability. Those are really the two that you're going to find, the two elements tied to those district goals that we're going to talk about a lot. It all starts with high expectations. Again, this is what we talk about on the first day of school. It's not just something we talk about and then we move on from it. Tonight is an example of how we're bringing that sense of having high expectations with us in our daily work. And so we need to focus on what we can control. And to focus on what we can control means that we need to understand what we're dealing with. That means that we have to dig in. It means we have to look at performance data and historical data and trend data. And a lot of things, you hear words like data thrown around a lot. You're going to learn a little bit more tonight about how we're actually using that so that we can become better. With the goal of, well, first of all, we're not going to use excuses. Are we in an unusual environment this year? Absolutely. We look at it as an opportunity to separate ourselves from other districts, and that we still can do the things that we need to do. We can still navigate around these unusual circumstances, but we can still pay attention to the things that are long-term important, which is to focus on how do we improve our overall student programs and ultimately our performance. So this means that we use SMART goals at every layer of the organization. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. It needs to be meaningful to everybody, and it needs to be communicated effectively. And it also needs to be evaluated in an ongoing way, because what makes sense or what works today might not necessarily make sense a year from now. So we're not going to jump from one thing to the other. We're not going to chase after fancy buzzwords. Education in general has a reputation of chasing buzzwords and moving from thing to thing. That's how we lose credibility. We're not talking about what's the latest, greatest initiative coming down the pike. We're talking about what is the foundational process and procedure that needs to exist in the district to make us better. So nothing fancy, foundational. And these are some of the district initiatives that we've talked about that are going to be the vehicle for us to achieve those goals. And I'm not going to talk a lot about it because these themes are going to come up in the presentations from the principals tonight. So back to SMART goals, because goals, I think sometimes that people talk about goals all the time, but how frequently are they really used, and are they really utilized? And do we revisit it as we go through the year? Is it something we talk about on the first day of school and then we forget about it, or is it something that is really in the forefront of what we focus on every day? So the goals that we're talking about, the theme you're going to keep seeing is they are specific. There is a specific outcome that we're looking for. We're not talking about general things. It has to be measurable, because after all, if it's not measurable, how do you actually know if we're moving towards where we say we need to be? If it's not measurable, that makes it a lot more subjective. It's got to be something that's achievable. We've talked from the beginning about the fact that we need to be truthful with ourselves. What is our current situation? We know, for example, that we're an identified district, and we have goals that the state says that we have that we need to move towards. Is it realistic for us in some cases to say, if our performance is at, and this is just for the sake of example, if our performance in a particular area that we're measuring is at 50% or 60%, is it realistic to say 100% of our students this year are going to do this if we have a trend line that suggests that we're not anywhere near that? Is that an aspirational goal that we might be able to get to down the road? Yeah, but is it realistic? And do people believe it when you say that this is where we are going to go? So we're not going to come up with things that make everybody feel good and warm and fuzzy and say we're going to do 100% this and 99% that or 95% this. It may not be, but we'll have a rationale of why that is the appropriate number. So the goal should be tough to achieve, but it should be within the realm of possibility. It shouldn't be so outrageous. It shouldn't be too easy either. It's got to challenge us. It's got to be relevant, obviously. We want to focus on things that are actually important to our mission. And it's got to have time constraints. It's got to have, we're going to do this by when. We don't want it to just linger forever. It's good. So that is the theme that's going to continue to come up tonight. And I'm not going to repeat myself. A lot of these things I just talked about. We're not going to make up something that's outrageous and that has no chance of being achieved.
I think what's important to note that I think the board will hear a difference with tonight with our goals is that historically the goals that have been presented by the district have in large part been activities. So I think that the process that the district has undertaken historically is to essentially share all of the things that are happening in the district as ways of becoming better. And one of the things that we worked on changing this year is to not just list all of the things that we do, but to be more specific about what exactly we want to improve and what we need to improve. So to Mr. Becetta's point about writing it as a SMART goal, you should hear very specific data tonight. You should hear specific goals or outcomes that our buildings are going to be working toward. And you should hear specific ways that our students and our staff members are going to help get us there. So as a person who's listened to goals for several years in Canastota, I'm pleased with the goals that we're sharing with you tonight because they really are a shift toward what a goal actually is. So, what resonates with me from this list is really that first one. Not disregarding all of the activities that happen, those things are still happening. Those are part of what we do as a school district. But what we wanted to highlight for you tonight were the things that we think are most critical and what is going to help get us moving in a forward direction.
And hopefully you'll see a connection of things that were activities. They may be a part of the action plan that's going to get us to the specific and measurable goal that is at the top of the page.
And then I'll kind of repeat what Mr. Becetta shared too around his second thought there, the pie in the sky philosophy. So sometimes when districts write goals, they do so under the umbrella of all students, which is an important perspective. But one of the things that we talked a lot about and that we have reflected on and have kind of landed on is that we want to write goals that will get us there in some time. But like he said, if we're at a 32% proficiency now, we certainly want all of our students to be proficient in whatever that particular topic is, but that's something that is going to be a bit more of a long-term goal to get us there. So just painting that picture for you when you hear the goals tonight. You'll hear some all students and you'll hear some more specific targets.
So what you're going to see tonight is an overview from each of the building principals. They're going to take you through some of the specific goals that impact student achievement. It is not, this is to really set the tone for the year. We're going to talk about things as we go on. We'll keep updating you as the year goes on. It's not meant to tell you everything. We didn't want this to be just a list of things, of activities. We know that sometimes that wears people out. If you just have a laundry list of activities, it sort of all blends together. So we can certainly go in more depth, and if there's some things that we need to address at the end of the presentation, we can to a greater degree, but we did want to highlight some of the things that we thought were particularly relevant, specific to that building's goals and where they wanted to go. So there will be some things that are especially pulled out and highlighted, some of the key elements. The things that are happening in an ongoing way, because there are layers of things that have to happen. Things like the quarterly assessments. You'll hear data or data a lot. You're going to see some specific examples related to how we look at data. We want to give you a little bit more of an understanding of what we're talking about, because sometimes that's just a really general, vague term that doesn't mean a whole lot unless you see some examples of what that means. And you're going to hear the term benchmarking a lot tonight. That is critical to understanding where are we in that point in time as we march toward our ultimate goal, our ultimate performance goal. So I always have to put John Wooden in any presentation I ever do. So, but I think these two quotes are particularly relevant to the work that we are tackling now. That we want to focus on the things that we can do. A lot of times we're feeling like we're at the whim of the state, we're at the whim of COVID, we're sort of always reacting to things. And despite all of those things that are happening now, we still have the ability to make a choice to be better. In the pockets of the, amidst the chaos, we can still have the moments of calm where we get together as a team and say, where do we want to go and how do we continue to address the things that are important. They may not be the urgent thing at that moment, but they are the urgent thing. They are the important thing for us to be the district that we want to be. And it takes time. This is a work in progress. This is going to take us a while to be where we want to be. I would say we need to be suspicious of anybody who says there is a quick fix. There's not a quick fix. It needs to be, we need focus and we need to work hard. And we need to make sure that we're all on the same page. And so this process that you're going to see tonight is a step towards that, to build long-term, sustainable process and procedure in the district that's going to make us better, get us where we want to be so that we can be the district that we know we should be. So with that, we're going to start off with Mrs. Carnahan, and she's going to take us through, start us off with Peterborough.
All right, thanks everybody. We're glad to be here tonight to update you on the great things that are happening in our buildings. So we have 3 goals at our lower elementary schools for this year. 2 are related to literacy and 1 is related to mathematics. The goals for Peterborough Street and Southside will sound very similar to you. Goal number 1 is to increase the percentage of proficient students on Ames Web early literacy benchmark tests. So in order to reach that goal, as well as our other 2, we're going to restructure our MTSS, which is our multi-tiered system of supports, better known as our RTI model. You've heard us talk about SST, our student support teams, and those meetings where we focus on individual student data and Tier 2 interventions like AIS support. We're going to use this mindset and practice to focus on the individual student data of all students, so a shift from looking at some students to all students. With her experience and expertise, our literacy learning coach, Ellen Burns, will be instrumental, she is already, in this process of setting individual student goals based on what our Ames Web data is telling us. So this is something that in the past was done by our AIS providers and with only our at-risk students. So we're looking to be more deliberate and having teachers set specific, measurable, and achievable goals for each of our students, not just our AIS population. Ellen is going to help us determine what, if anything, is necessary for professional development at Tier 1. So that's that good classroom instruction that everyone will benefit from, as well as interventions for our struggling students at Tier 2 and at Tier 3. In addition to what we already do and use. So basically, what we're talking about is what we're doing for our most at-risk students working, is what's happening at Tier 1, that basic good classroom instruction, is that working? Are we seeing a shift in the data? So our regular data chats begin this week with all teachers, and I am really excited about this new initiative. It's not like we didn't collect data before. Of course we did. But it's what we're going to do with it and how we're going to revisit it. So the meetings start tomorrow, and that's going to let us touch base with teachers in small groups, and it's going to let us sit down and talk about the data that we've collected so far, set those individual student goals. Again, not just for our AIS population. And our plan is to meet again when we have a little bit more, when we have additional information at the end of the quarter. So that's going to give us writing information. That's going to give us quarterly information, quarterly assessment data, as well as an updated guided reading level score too. So the targeted questions that we're going to be answering after analyzing that data is, what will you do differently? So we're going to answer that question for individuals, for classes, and perhaps even for grade levels for the building as a whole. We're going to look for trends. So if we find that we have 10 kids with the same deficit, maybe it's sight words, maybe it's blending, maybe it's segmenting words. We're going to figure out how we can be more effective and efficient with our instruction and our support. So thus far, Ellen and I have spent time with our school psychologist, Amanda Schlegel, and our AIS providers. Tomorrow, we're going to sit down with individual classroom teachers, and then when we have more data toward the end of the quarter, Ellen and Amanda, AIS teachers, and I will sit down with classroom teachers, and those are the building data team meetings that we're talking about. So Mr. Becerra said, this isn't a one and done. This is something that we are invested in and that we're excited about being more aware and more on top of this data and all that it can tell us and all that it can affect in a positive way. Instructional walkthroughs. So specifically a goal of 5 per day with specific learning intentions and look-fors is what's going to help me monitor what's happening in classrooms on a daily basis. It's not like I didn't do walkthroughs before, but we're setting numbers on those, so 5 a day. So one example is looking for essential questions. That's something we've agreed upon as an administrative team. We're going to be looking for those. At Peterborough Street, those are in the form of I can statements. I can blend sounds to make words. I can tell what a text is about and tell what I learned. Those are a couple examples. So I'm looking for them to be posted. I'm looking for them to be shared. I'm looking for them to be revisited at the end of the lesson to check for understanding. And it's also imperative that it's in kid language. So that looks a lot different at Peterborough Street than it does at the other buildings. So down the road, we can add things as an administrative team, such as teacher clarity or questioning techniques. So now to talk about the current data that we do know. So our literacy data here. So we have set realistic goals based on what I know, so based on our historical data and where we want to be. So the goals, right now we're at 17% of our kindergartners scored at a proficient level on their early literacy benchmark. So we've set a goal of 37%, an increase of 20% for winter. That's a pretty hefty goal, but I know that kindergarten students are sponges, and the more time that they're spending working on letters and sounds, working with teachers and aides, and the calendar time alone boosts that. So we always see a huge jump from fall to winter. So that's why you see a goal of an increase of 20%, and then we're aiming for a goal of 70% toward this in the spring. First grade started out higher, 27% proficient. So we've set a realistic goal of 37%, an increase of 10% for winter, and then an increase of closer to 43% at 70% for spring. Okay, so we're going to switch gears now to math. You will certainly notice common action items and accountability measures, but goal 2 is to increase the percentage of proficient students on Ames Web early numeracy benchmark tests. So in this regard, we're going to tap into the expertise and experience of math learning coach Jody Popple. So we'll be focusing on similar things. What do we need to do for Tier 1? Is what we're doing working? What can we be doing at Tier 2 and Tier 3 to shift our data there? Jody will be here later this month. She's going to be here the 21st, and we're going to start by determining unfinished learning and instruction gaps that occurred in the spring, as well as prioritizing the power standards. Our goal is also to bring more consistency with the delivery of Eureka Math at the K-6 level, and lesson plan structure and template also to be used at K-6. So as you can see, we're starting out with much stronger math data there. 51% at kindergarten, and 42% at first grade. And then you can see the goals that we've set for winter and then for spring. So the next slide demonstrates the ideal progression of increase that we're looking for using our Ames Web benchmark data. Green is good, and I know that most of you have seen, you've seen the pyramids, you've seen the triangles before. So green is good and indicates students with little or no risk. Yellow indicates some risk, and red indicates our most academically fragile and at-risk students. Our goal, of course, is to increase the green, like you see, and decrease the yellow and decrease the red. So this is almost a perfect example of what you would like your data to look like. I think this has 70% green. We really want to see 80% green, 15% yellow, and 5% red. And we will be able to share these triangles with you so that we can compare true data from fall to winter in the areas of both literacy and math when we meet again. Okay, goal number 3 is that 80% of our students will be reading at or above grade level in June of 2021. So again, similar action steps and evidence. We're talking about guided reading data here. At kindergarten, we do not test our students until January. They're working on letters and sounds and blending and tapping and all of that. So we're beginning to put letters together to make words, words together to make sentences, and then we can go from there. So in first grade, the data I have to share with you, that was when our first graders were in kindergarten in March of 2020, 76% of them were reading at or above grade level. When we tested them in September, 37% of them are at or above grade level. That's a guided reading level of C. So that's a significant, we've got a lot of work to do there, of course. So we've set a lofty goal of 47% with an increase of 10% there. I do need to note that the 37% does not include all of our students, all of our remote students. They have not all been tested yet, so that's something that we're working out. It's a new hurdle for us, testing students' guided reading levels without having the students physically right in front of you. Okay, so I think that we can transition to our South Side goals next. And as I mentioned, they are very similar to Peterborough Street's, along with the action steps and the evidence. Specific targets, of course, will be set by the new South Side principal, since we are going through a bit of a transition stage there right now. But I do want to highlight a couple of changes just so you're aware of that data. So goal number 1, very similar to what you saw at Peterborough Street, but instead of the early literacy benchmark tests, we're talking about oral reading fluency for them. And again, that's because at this point, starting in second grade, we're putting together, and toward the end of first grade, I should really say, we're able to put together those skills, the letters and sounds, words, sentences, all of that. So oral reading fluency is what will be tested. And then if we go to the math goal, and I did just pop in the, sorry about that, the numbers, which is where we are right now. But on our math goals, that's a math composite score, because there are several different tests that are given at the second and third grade level. We also make a shift from Peterborough Street to South Side in Ames Web with the fact that students can take those tests independently. They sit down on their Chromebook and they answer the prompts. At Peterborough Street in kindergarten and first grade, you need to sit down with the students one-on-one, so it's very teacher-directed. So it's more time-consuming, but it's the nature of what we're doing, and It's honestly, it's their first time taking a test too. So it makes sense that they would sit with an adult to do that. So at second grade, that's when we make the shift to the computer-based testing. So there are numbers, and again, the Southside principal will set those specific goals. And then their third goal is very much like Peterborough's, that 80% of students will be reading at or above grade level in June of 2021. So the data that we had from March was that 62% of second graders were proficient or were at above grade level, and 68% of third graders. And I will turn things over to Mr. Faustino to tell us more about 4-6.
I was just wondering, do I get 45 minutes or an hour? 15 minutes. 10. Good. Well, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate the time to share some of our Robert Street goals. We talked last week, or the last board meeting, some of our goals as connected to the SEP plan. But as Mr. Becerra often says, there are certain goals that we have to do, and there are other things that just make sense. Our goals are a mixture of both. So our first goal for Robert Street this coming fall and over the next several years is we want to increase our attendance and decrease our chronic absenteeism. The school will implement a comprehensive system for addressing our student attendance and chronic absenteeism for all students that will result in a chronic absenteeism rate of no higher than 11.2%. We know that our benchmark in the middle of the year in January, we're setting a goal of 10.6%. That will tell us if we are online to reach that goal. We're starting from our baseline at 12.8%, and historically we were upwards of 16 and 14%. So we've been able to significantly cut that down over the last couple of years, and one of our highlights that we highlighted last time in our SEP presentation was that when we left in March, we know that we can get that down. One of the biggest obstacles, they said when I arrived here, was that attendance is always going to haunt us, and we were able to get that down to 4% in March. We know it's something that we can achieve, and we really wish we could have went through with that momentum last year. Some of the highlights of our action steps is going to be really, really important. At the beginning of the year, we really looked through the student attendance and data, and we identified those families and parents that we really needed to get to in the beginning of the year. We sent letters and talked to those folks. That was really, really important, a piece that we had not done before. Moving forward, the high school, middle school, and Robert Street will be in collaboration with the Proving Ground, which is a Harvard entity, and we'll be designing and establishing an informational postcard that will be sent out to students who are at risk or displaying chronic absenteeism patterns, and it is a form of a postcard. One of the highlights, and again, I won't read through every action step, so one of the highlights that we're going to be putting together, hasn't been done in the past, is Robert Street is going to have an engagement committee. One of the pieces that we have to do is get more people on board and be aware of these numbers that are affecting us negatively. And so we're going to be putting in an engagement committee that's going to be built up of a lot of stakeholders across our building. We're going to meet on a regular basis and be talking about this, and then also presenting this out in our faculty meetings. One of the feedback that we got, and I was sharing this afternoon, was one of the feedback from our teachers was we didn't know that data. We didn't know how many kids were there. So what we want to do is put those things in place. So one of the highlights of this particular goal is to create this engagement committee so that we can have more stakeholders and more people on board. We also can share that information in a timely manner. Goal number 2. This is a really goal that just makes sense for us. I think one of the positives about Canastota is that we have Ames Web Plus, and it is a structure that can really give us a lot of good, rich data to really drive our culture. And so our goal number 2 is that our teachers will utilize benchmark assessment data to adjust instructional practice to best meet the needs of all students, as evidenced by a 5 to 10% increase in grade level proficiency based on the mid-year and final benchmark Ames Web benchmark assessments. We have our early results here in the fall. As you can see, we have a wide range, a little bit of anomaly. Typically you see in the beginning of the year that math is traditionally a lot higher. We've seen coming off of a year of unfinished learning, unfinished instruction, that our math is significantly lower than it has been in the past. So a little bit of an anomaly, nothing that we'd expected, but that doesn't give any excuses that we're not going to set our goals pretty high. This will be something we come back and revisit. I'm not going to read everything to you, but you can see that in ELA, we were certainly have made a big push with literacy over the last couple of years, and I think that that is starting to show it. But if you look in the spring, our goals are pretty lofty at the year. They're realistic, but I also, too, we have to be a little bit more comfortable with being uncomfortable towards the end of the year and really, really being laser focused and to increase that achievement piece. Some really big highlights, some things that we've been really getting started over the last couple years is meeting more vertically and horizontally with intention. We'll have a lot more collaboration and getting teachers time out of their classroom to meet and to really wrestle with that data. We're good at collecting data. It's the next critical steps after you have that data, and that's the part that we're going to be building in to our culture. We'll be doing a lot of group reflection, item analysis, and action planning based on our Ames Web Plus, as indicated in our goal, as well as quarterly assessments. We really believe that quarterly assessments are a true indication of how students are progressing. We're going to spend a lot of time around quarterly assessments. We'll have a lot more targeted professional development. Two things in particular will be around higher order thinking and effective questioning, as well as formative assessment. You can't instruct if you're not formative assess, if you don't know where the students are at. One of the other highlights that was built into our set plan is our instructional coaching cycles. It's important. We know that it has high yielding results, and having our plethora of coaches, Ellen being in attendance, Jody Popple, as well as our ed tech, no more important than Cecile this year, of developing that capacity for ed tech. And then we will continue to look at benchmark rehearsals, something that we haven't done here in the past, but we will be doing to make predictions in terms of our state assessment results. But we will be doing benchmarking both in December and March for those students to give us an indication of how well they're going to do moving forward and if they're meeting grade level standards. And goal number 3. This really relates to coming off of a COVID year. We have found that a lot of our parents giving us a lot of feedback that they were really concerned with the social and emotional well-being of their students coming back, whether in a hybrid model, fully remote, or if we ever came back with all of our students. This is a really major concern. So by June 2021, the school will have established a comprehensive approach to social emotional learning, particularly the Positivity Project, that will result in a year-to-year 10% or more cumulative decrease in office and discipline referrals compared to 2019 and 2020. When I first arrived here in Canastota, one of the major pieces that were pointed out to me by the board and something that we need to take care of was getting the behaviors under control at Robert Street. It was a concern. Our numbers were extremely high in comparison to districts that were similar to ours. We feel we've made a huge dent into those, but we have a ways to go. And so we're looking for a 10% decrease over the next several years, so not just this year, but year in and year out. You should always be having a 10% decrease in office and discipline referrals. And that includes your suspensions, your out of school, your in school, detentions. We should have a 10% decrease. How are we going to monitor that? Well, we'll do a mid-year benchmark check when we do our data pull at the end of January, and we will be looking to see if we have a decrease and a 10% decrease. Now, I think the natural question is, well, you haven't had as many students. That September and October be down, absolutely. But I think this is more of a long-term goal, is that we should be looking to decrease this over many years, not just this year, but when we go back to normal in a normal year, that's something that we want to have as a part of our culture, that we're looking to increase our restorative processes and decreasing our office discipline referrals. A couple of highlights is that we're going to go back to revisit our restorative model, which I'm going to share some information with you. We will do our second in a series of book studies around restorative circles this year. That engagement committee that is going to be talking about attendance and professional development will also be talking about our office discipline referrals as well. We'll be looking at survey data, student discipline data, suspension data, and student discipline referrals. Again, one of the comments and feedback from the staff was they didn't have that information. They didn't know those particular numbers. And so now we're going to be sharing that information at our faculty meetings so that now they understand of those patterns and trends. And then again, we'll be continuing to look to engage more and more parents in that process as well, all of those stakeholders. And you can see the timelines are in there. We'll be meeting monthly as well. I think one of the, as Mr. Becerra often says is that we're going to be caught up in buzzwords, but I think restorative justice is a process that is really a staple now, and moving away from that PBIS model into more restorative justice in the upper elementary school. So I think it's important to take a step back and find out what is the traditional model or approach to student discipline. I mean, what have we typically done over the last 30 years? And if you look at that, when we talk about the traditional approach, we're really talking about rules that are violated. When students have discipline problems, it's that they have violated a rule, and with a rule becomes punishment or a punitive model. Accountability typically always means punishment. You did this, you get this. Justice focus on establishing guilt. You've done something, I'm going to make you feel guilty about it. How are we going to change? And then the justice directed at the offender, and oftentimes we've talked about over the last couple of years that there's not enough time spent on the victim. How does that change? What does that shift? We're going to be moving towards more a restorative model or a relational model. When something happens, people and relationships are violated. It's not a rule. It's about other people matter and how they affect other people. We have opportunities to amends and remorse. There's opportunities for students to collaborate more often. Accountability is about understanding the harm or impact that they have on other people, not on a rule, but how they affect other people. Justice is identified by needs and obligations. We often find out, we always know behavior, there's a lot more layers to that, why students do the things they do, and so it's a way that they communicate. And then the offender, victim, and community all have roles in the restorative justice model. One of the initiatives that we put in this year is that our teachers are doing restorative circles every morning from 7:50 to 8 o'clock. And so we're connecting with students every morning to find out what's going on in life, and we're trying to head things off. All teachers are meeting students at the door. What's the restorative justice model about? Every opportunity, every action, every misbehavior, anything that a student does is an opportunity for learning. It's not about a punitive model or punishing them. It's about an opportunity to learn and grow. And that's the difference between the traditional model and a restorative justice model. It's a shift in thinking. It'll be it's December and we'll be going through 2021. There's a series of book studies. So the first one would be launched in December, and then there'll be another one in 2021, two separate. It's not December 2021, it's December and 2021. There's a series of 3 books that you go through and you build off them one after another. Last year we did the first one. Restorative circles will be this year, and the next one will be restorative conferences. So it's a way to get the parents involved when there's a discipline problem. Yep. And that's why, it's a great question. That's why in there it's a series of book studies. Yeah.
And good evening, everybody. One of the things that I want to add in conjunction with what Mr. Faustino had talked about was some information about the Positivity Project. The reason we included this slide was because both he and I will be talking about some of these instructional practices, which include a lot of common language, which is important when you're dealing with students. And so as far as the Positivity Project is concerned, one of the big mantras of the Positivity Project is other people matter. And so the Positivity Project incorporates a lot of character education as well as character-based relationship building. How are kids interacting with one another? How are they interacting with their teachers and the adults within the building? So in conjunction with restorative justice, we're also going to be focusing on the Positivity Project, which really essentially inspires students to be their best selves, to really pull out those character traits that we know that can make students successful and that students can really focus on so that they are doing better, that they are acting better, that they are more focused on their school and academic progress. And then probably most importantly right now in this day and age, building a model of compassion and empathy. We all do better when we are compassionate for one another and we are trying to be understanding with one another. And one of the things that I liked about the Positivity Project, this is that power is local, autonomy is crucial, and you must trust the people on the ground. And those people on the ground are our staff and the people who are on the front lines, working with our students, interacting with our students, and educating our students to be their best selves. So we believe that these two initiatives will have a positive impact on the social emotional health of our students, as well as a positive impact on some of their behaviors, which leads me to our first goal. So at the junior senior high school, our first 3 years, we actually saw a decline in the number of referrals, out-of-school suspensions, and in-school suspensions. Unfortunately, over the past 2 years, we've seen a kind of an uptick trend. And what we know about behavior and referrals is that if we can address the behaviors and limit some of the behaviors and therefore focus on the relationships and what we could do as far as like Mr. Faustino had talked about with the restorative justice model, what is it that you did was wrong and how can you change your behaviors as you move forward? And so we have several steps here, which I'm not going to go through all of them, but I do want to focus on the bolded ones, which are the Positivity Project and the restorative justice piece. Some of the other things are things that we have done in the past that we're going to continue to do, but those two things are the things that we're going to spend some time on and focus on as it relates to student behaviors, because if we address the behaviors, we can keep them in class. We keep them in class, then they could be more academically successful, and that's the idea. The second goal is in relation to our math and ELA performance. Right now, we're going to focus on the STAR benchmark assessments because this was a measurable piece of data that we could use from the fall, winter, and spring. And so whereas we're going to continue to build common literacy expectations, we're going to continue to focus on reading fluency, reading comprehension, and vocabulary across content areas. That's the key there. And we're going to continue to do department meetings focusing on vertical alignment and content focus. But we need to get better at our use of data. We've collected data, but we need to be more intentional and deliberate about how we use that data. So we actually had a meeting this afternoon with Mr. Zaire from BOCES to talk to us about pulling reports and then more importantly, what we're going to do with those reports. And so as an example, one of the reports allows us to look at where the students are deficient as it relates to the standards. So a teacher can pull up his or her class, pull up the report that says where students scored as far as each standard is concerned, and that gives our teachers the ability to say, okay, I need to focus on this standard because my students did poorly in that standard. Now, the fall benchmarks are a little tough because a lot of those standards have not been hit yet. So the students are kind of starting fresh, so to speak, in relation to those grade level standards. So as we go, we want to identify those things that we did weak in, make a plan to address those as we move forward, and then as we get to the ones that we haven't hit yet, what's going to be our plan to address those standards the best we can and in a way that's most effective. So you can see what I did here is, and it's hard to see from where you are, I'm sure, but we have our ELA in math. We have the students who actually took the fall benchmarks. So, you can see 7th grade, 77 out of 95 took them. 86 out of 95 took it in math. And what we're finding is that students at the secondary level, they don't always take these assessments seriously. So we find a lot of students doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or a pattern of that. And so we're really trying to focus on why we need to take these assessments and how they're going to be helpful. So one of the things that I talked to my staff about today was be deliberate, be explicit. When you're talking to kids about what and why we're doing this, tell them why we're doing it. Tell them we're doing it because it's going to help us drive our instruction and tell us what we need to focus on and tell them that these are part of our building goals. These are things that are going to hold us as teachers and administrators accountable to them, to parents, to our supervisors and to our Board of Education. Be explicit about what it is we're doing and why. And so that's where we're going to put a lot of our focus is in this data piece, focusing on the data, focusing on what needs to be improved, and then creating action plans. One of the things that Ellen has helped us out a lot with was not only bringing Adam in, but she and I created today, a template for teachers to use, basically as a way to keep track of where they're at. So, like the first column was about their identified deficiency. Their second column was about the time frame with which they deliver that particular standard. So, did they already teach it, or when did they teach it within their curriculum, and or what unit do they teach it in? And then the third column was their action plan. How are they going to address that particular standard in a way that we hope is going to be most effective? And if that means it's something that they've already done, what are they going to do differently as they move forward? Because I think that's probably the most important piece when you're looking at data is what can we do differently? And as has been discussed a couple of times, we're going to continue to do the stuff that we know is helpful, but now we need to start looking at things that we know can be helpful that we haven't done well enough in the past, or that we haven't done at all in the past. And so that's one of my goals here, is to use data more effectively, because I think we need to do that. Our third goal is to look at our state or Regents exams and to increase the level of achievement on those particular exams. And so, much like the elementary buildings, we're going to continue to focus on data. We're going to restructure our RTI and MTSS process at the junior senior high school. And the reason for that is because we need a more streamlined approach where we're focusing on student deficiencies and student behavior. So that RTI and MTSS is not only about academics, it's also about behavior. And where we're going to put some of our attention. And the bottom line is that it links back to restorative justice. It links back to Positivity Project. It links back to our use of data. So my hope is that people see that a lot of these are connected, and they're connected really from K-12. So one of the things that I want to focus on is our mastery level. And so via some of the guidance that we had as we were writing these goals, we took a Regents exam from each content area, and we said, okay, in 2019, not 2020, because 2020 we didn't have Regents exams. So in 2019, what were our mastery rates? Not passing rates. That's very important here. These are not passing rates. These are mastery rates. And how, what percent increase do we want to see moving into 2021? And if you take an average class of about 100 students, so we have about 48 students in U.S. history, for example, got mastery. So if we increase that by 7 kids at the mastery level, not passing level, mastery level, that's a significant increase, and we hope that that's lofty and realistic. And so, if we don't get there, at a minimum, we certainly want to see progress to there. And I think that's one of the things about data and goal setting we got to be careful with, is we want to set them high and lofty, but if they're so lofty we can't reach them, we certainly want to see progress towards that. And so that's certainly the goal academically, that's certainly the goal behaviorally, and that's certainly the goal as we look at our quarterly assessments, our STAR benchmarking assessments, and certainly our discipline data. So those are the 3 goals that we are focusing on currently at the high school.
So that's a lot of stuff that was just thrown at you. We'll have a chance to let things sink in and digest over the course of the year. But I think, as was pointed out frequently in the presentations, you can see that there are specific performance targets tied to the things we're talking about. There are specific action plans that are directly linked to it. So the theme, I guess, of all this is there's a connection. There's a consistency in the form, in the process that we're using, whether we're talking about something at Peterborough or something at the high school. Is it perfect? No, it's not where we want to be, because to get where we want to be, it means that we have to have everybody on the same page across the board. So it's a work in progress. But we feel good about the fact that we are using specific and measurable goals. As Mr. Altabello just pointed out, the attempt at setting goals, there's not a perfect science to setting goals. So we've had a lot of conversation about what is the right goal. If your performance is at whatever level. And the measure we're using is it needs to be something that challenges us. That maybe we can get there, but it's not a given. But we also don't want to use something that doesn't challenge us, that we're probably thinking we're already there, or we're on pace to get that. So it's not a perfect science. We will update you on the circumstances that impact our progress. As has been pointed out in presentations that you've seen before, we don't want to give excuses, but sometimes there are legitimate reasons why certain things have to change. So said from the beginning, we're not about excuses, and we're not. But that's a realistic part of the goal process, that sometimes we have to, make tweaks and updates based on circumstances. What did I miss?
So I'll do what I usually do and say the same thing he said differently. So earlier I talked about how this process looks a little different this year in terms of specific goals. One of the other things that we learned that was missing, that we want to include, is that this is the first in a series of presentations to you about this process. So what you've heard tonight it's really an initial starting point for these goals. So this is where we're at now. These are the things that we're going to start to work on in order to start to accomplish those goals. So you heard things like working on our RTI or MTSS process, for example. Well, you should expect that the next time that we talk about these goals, that we'll be able to update you if there is data to share, but also you'll get to hear about the progress and some of the changes that were made for something specific like that. So that's also something that I would like to share as something different with the board, just to keep you apprised of the progress that we're making toward these goals.
And one thing I would add is, whether sometimes we're going to get to the target performance level, sometimes we're not. But the idea behind this is we're pressing forward towards that, and we're having the folk things, and we're having discussions about how we're going to get there. Whether we get there or not, we can't guarantee we're always going to get there, but just by having the focus on that and having everybody in the school understand that that's the focus is going to keep us, moving in the right direction. We're not going to stagnate. We're not going to do things because this was necessarily the way things had been done previously. We're always going to keep challenging ourselves. What is the angle that will help us get better? And you heard a lot about data analysis, and we're looking at it with more layers to it, right? Because there's so many different ways we can look at data. You can look at it by yearly grade level data or cohort data. There's a million ways we can do it. And so looking at it through more angles is going to help us to be more precise in setting targets that will challenge us. So there is the overview. We'll keep coming back to it. Are there any questions that you have at this point?
Denny, are you going to be sharing that information with the parents, the individual student goal? Is that going to be something that's going to be shared with the parents eventually? Then I'm just with the Ames Web and the other reading program. How is this going to mesh with the Common Core? The state has come in and targeted us for our low Common Core scores. How is that going on? I don't see improvement in getting the threes and the fours on the actual Common Core test. Is it something that is still being addressed, or is it just not part of these goals, or?
Yes, it is still being addressed through these goals. So the question, just for folks at home, is how is Ames Web Plus, which is the K3 benchmark universal screening tool, and STAR, which is the 712 screening tool, how are those two tools going to help identify students who need support in order to be successful on state assessments, correct? Yes. Yep. So these measures work in conjunction with. I think I know what you're asking. You're asking, is Ames Web going to identify Math Standard 2.4 as a deficiency, and how are we going to work toward that? Or maybe I'm not understanding. So, so the statement that I would make to that is the statement that I made when I talked about ESSA and I talked about state assessments at the last board meeting. And that is that these tools that we talked about tonight will help identify deficiencies for students. And those skills are things that we will target. And those skills are what will make them better able to perform on those assessments, is one point I'll make. And the second point I'll make is something that I don't think we did say tonight, but isn't a secret, and that is that these measures are one point of measure. And the reason that we use these is because they're universal and they're nationally normed. So when we're looking at student results in Ames Web Plus or STAR, we're looking not only just how they compare internally, but also across the state and nationwide, which is a different way to measure your progress. So. Correct, and that is going to be done. So we talked about the SET plan and the DSIP plan at the last meeting, and those items are specifically addressed there too. And I got that's the other piece tonight. You know, we went back and forth on how much do we want to really share tonight. Not that we're keeping information, but we wanted to make sure that we targeted specific information tonight. We didn't talk about every single thing that we're doing.
Yeah, part of the data that we're looking at is looking at what specifically, how did our students perform, whether as a group or as individual students. And then that's part of the process, is once we've identified areas of deficiency, then what's the instructional response to that? How do we remedy that? That's part of the overall process that we talked about. Adam Zaire, who is the data person that we're working with, can produce 1 million reports. What we need to do is use it fully with all that it's telling us. And so that's woven into this whole process of looking at that. What were you going to say, Jay?
I can't speak to Ames Web Plus, but I know STAR is directly connected to the standards, so that. So I can't speak for AWES Plus, but STAR is directly connected to the standard. So like if students test in STAR and they have a deficiency in that standard, it'll tell us what standard they're deficient in. So that's where we can put our attention. And then, as we know, that when if you're doing an item analysis of whether it's the Regents and or even the 3.8 tests, they often break it down, and it breaks down to standards. So that's one connection to how we can improve on the state assessments.
And maybe, Tim, you're asking, why isn't there a goal saying we're going to have, this percentage of 3s and 4s? Maybe that's part of your question. Why isn't it going to improve? And those things are tied to the SET plan and the DSIP plan. So those things are happening. They just aren't reflected specifically here directly.
One of the main reasons, and the question is about participation for those people at home where you couldn't hear that. So you'll see that, for 12th grade under ELA, get 20 out of 93. For 12th grade, 29 out of 93. There's two main factors to that. One, we have about 30 to 40 seniors who go to BOCES. So they don't take the SAR assessment at BOCES, but they're getting their ELA and math credits at BOCES. So they're kind of left out of that number. And then the other thing with a big remote model, we're struggling to get some of our remote kids to take the assessment. and to hold them accountable to the assessment. And that's one of the things, with this remote format in general, is what teeth do we have for those kids who are at home all the time, and how can we hold them accountable, not only behaviorally, but academically at times too. It's a challenge that we're facing. In fact, I chair our regional principals meetings, and that's one of the things we're talking about tomorrow morning, is how we're holding kids accountable from, who are at home.
The other thing, how many are actually taking, in the case of math, how many are actually taking the fourth year math?
Exactly. And
Some they're going to be taking it, you don't have to necessarily take 4 years of math, so.
Right. And we've been hearing loud and clear that we want to push kids to take more classes, and we're really trying to do that. One of the things is that kids know that they only need 22 credits, so therefore they don't want to take additional classes they have to take. And some of the electives that we're offering, we're not getting the interest for some reason. I've lived in under two models. One where you have a minimum requirement for seniors, like for example, like that, they have to take 5.5 credits regardless if they go over 22 or not. And there's benefits and there's detriments to that. Right now we're in a model where we don't have that requirement, and therefore kids are not taking certain classes, and so like our electives are not seeing the participation we like to see, and we're not seeing kids take extra classes. And the flip side of that, and the other model where we have required a minimum number of credits for seniors, for example, we've seen those seniors blow off those classes, not do the work for those classes, and pretty much tell teachers, oh, sorry, and then teachers get frustrated on that side of things. So it's a double-edged sword on how we approach that and what we want. And if we're gonna do something like that, I think we need to phase that in with upcoming freshmen and work that up as they get to seniors, because I think having that be the expectation from the start is probably gonna be best, as opposed to throwing it on current juniors and seniors right now. But again, I live both models, and there's positives and negatives to both. And the start data, it's going to be tricky because, like I said, the start data will be tricky because, not all kids take it seriously and not all kids take it. And then especially right now in the remote model, it's been a bit of a challenge to get a lot of our kids or all of our kids to take it. We did pretty good at most other grade levels, but, seniors don't necessarily need to at this point based on what their current schedules are. Well, get more to take it. Yes, that's the goal. My hope is that all those 66 kids will take it again, but that will get more for sure.
So it's not limiting to what we took.
Correct. Yep. And what I'll do is I'll include the numbers again. I'll include the numbers of how many tested again, compared to how many didn't. Which is important. Because you take like a geometry for example. Sorry. You take like a geometry for example, depending on the school district. Certain school districts require all their kids to take. School district only require a certain amount of kids to take geometry. So when you're comparing scores and exams, it makes a difference on what you're looking at and what numbers you're looking at and how many kids took it compared to how many kids didn't take it and so on and so forth. So that skews some things, but I mean the bottom line for us is that we are consistent and we're going to try to measure our data consistently. So that's the goal for that.
Thank you. I do, as a final thing, I just want to thank the administrators. This was a different process for them, and they put a lot of work into it. So appreciate their hard work, and we'll continue to work this process, and we look forward to presenting updated information to you. Thank you. Okay. I'll keep talking. Okay. So transitioning now, we talked about things that were important, big picture for us. Now I'll transition back to things that are important today. Some of the things that we've been dealing with literally by, from hour to hour, day to day, and that is our reopening plan. So, so far so good. We're into our 6th week of having kids back. And while we've had some hiccups along the way, we feel like, we're trending in the right direction. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of things for you relative to our reopening plan. I want to reiterate that from the beginning, back in the summer, when we knew that we would be moving to a hybrid model for instruction, that we said from the beginning our goal was to safely bring students back to school. There's no, I don't think, argument that it's a better situation for kids to be with us, both, from the academic aspect and the social aspect, in a million other ways. It's good for kids to be here. But we were conservative from the beginning in that we did not want to have classrooms bursting at the seams or buses overflowing. When, for example, our limit on the bus is 21 students, that doesn't mean, well, we'll get a 22nd on. We have been strict in our following of the guidelines because we did not want at any point for anybody to say you've compromised the standards because it made your life easier. We're not about trying to make our life easier. We're about trying to do things the right way. So we were admittedly conservative with the way we opened, but we did so safely, and it worked. So we've been looking at what are some opportunities that we might have now that we know how many students are in our cohort 1 and 2, how many students are in the fully remote model. What is our space that we have available to work in the school? What is our level of staffing? How can we be creative with the way we use our space and our staffing? And so we were happy that it's been almost 2 weeks, I guess, or it has been 2 weeks ago, that we were able to announce that Peterborough and Southside students who were in the cohort 1 and 2 models would be able to return on Monday, October 26th. So we're looking forward to that. There's going to be additional correspondence going home to families probably tomorrow, just reiterating that fact. That is part of what we're calling our phase 2 of reopening. Obviously, we're not done. The evaluation continues in every aspect of how we operate as a district. So we were looking at Robert Street, and we looked at how many students we had in each grade level and what was our capacity in the rooms. This meant that at room configurations, and sometimes we have, and this is the same for all of our buildings, is there a way where we can get students back with us if we just do things a little bit differently, with the idea that it's worth it. If it means that we move a bookshelf or a bookcase or a desk around, if that means that we can get another student, then that makes sense. So we're in the same spot at Robert Street. Some grade levels are a little bit easier to navigate around than others. But I want to just reiterate the fact that we are not compromising as we bring students back any of the distancing standards that have shaped our process from the very beginning. So when we say we're not putting students closer than the 6 feet distance, or in phys ed class, for example, 12 feet of distance, we're not going to do that. We're not going to put more kids on the buses. We're not going to do any of those things. What we're saying is that by looking at how we can bring students in, we feel like we can get those students in and still maintain those standards. I just want to be clear with that. It is not a compromising of the standards that we've had from the beginning. So with that being said, we're going to be sending out a communication to families indicating that our Robert Street students in grades 4 through 6 also will be returning to a 5-day-a-week schedule. That takes us a little bit longer. As you can see, we've staggered things. We needed to have an appropriate level of lead time. We're going to have the return of the 4-6 students, again, the students that are currently in a hybrid schedule. The students who are remote will continue to be remote for the remainder of the semester. But the students who are in a hybrid schedule in 4 through 6 will return, and that is Monday, November 16th. Now, one of the reasons for November 16th is that coincides with the start of the second marking period. And there are several things that are significant to that as teachers are preparing for any types of adjustments that we're making. We also need some time. Again, some grade levels were a little bit, I don't want to say easy, but they were a simpler puzzle to solve. Some grade levels there was more involved. So we're still going to be engaged with staff members in the coming weeks. I am, Mr. Clancy is, and the principals continuing to go through the different scenarios so that we can be as efficient in operation as possible. So again, this is going to be continuously evaluated, certainly looking at how our 7-12 schedule is operating. I know Mr. Altabello is looking at some things there as well. So we will continue, obviously, to update the community on where we are as we progress through. But we're happy that, again, getting into our 6th week in school, things are going pretty well, and we're anxious to get students back here in a safe way, and then over the next few weeks. So. Another important part of it, and I want to thank Mr. Congdon. He's done a lot of work in the last few weeks. It's been hectic on the athletic side, restarting athletics several weeks behind when we normally would be starting. The number of procedures that are in place from the state in Section 3 and the Center State Conference is sort of overwhelming, and so he's had to be on top of a lot of things. So I want to thank him as well for his work in getting us ready. Kids are pretty much having games every day at this point, and that's going to continue. So hopefully the weather holds out. So progress. It's going to be a while before we're back to normal, but we do think that these things are all, this is good news for our kids. Some things to look forward to in the next few weeks. Any questions about reopening?
One of the questions that came up earlier is about high school. Is there potential?
Yeah, we're not there yet. I think so. Well, we're looking at everything. I think the tougher challenge when we're just looking at capacity. We're just at a different number, right? I mean, I think Jay's nodding, is that when we looked, and we've been in the rooms, Mr. Altabello and Mr. Clancy and Mr. Panuccio and I, we've been going around and measuring it with Mr. Campbell, and the capacity just isn't there. Where in some of the classrooms in the district, you might be closer to like a 16 or 18 with desks spaced adequately. You cannot get there with most of the junior, senior high rooms. In some of the rooms, if you think, best example I can think of is probably some of the front math rooms, for example, in the front of the building. Those are not very big buildings, or rooms, I should say, in that building. So there's just different challenges. What were you going to say? Yeah. So it's a tougher one. Fortunately, and again, we're not saying that it's perfect, but we've been functional with virtual. I think it's a little bit more doable for the secondary kids than the younger kids. However, we're looking at it and we're evaluating our space to see if we can, what we can do. Yep, yeah, we're looking at it. Anything else? Okay.
I'm going to reserve my comments till our board comment period. All right, there is no old business tonight, new business. Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of the schools, the board does hereby approve the following policy. Policy 6306, leave of absence for COVID-19 qualified reason. Regulation 6306.1, emergency paid leave request. And 6306.2, expanded FMLA. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second. Was Tracy? Any discussion, any comments, anything?
Yeah, I was just going to comment, just so everybody's aware, a lot of these policies are already in existence. There was just some updated language based on all of the COVID-19 circumstances with federal and state regulations. There's a number of criteria that employees, faculty, staff have to now submit in order to require things based on COVID-19 regulations and mandates. So really, it's just some updated wording. We're not doing anything different here as a district. All the other component districts and BOCES pretty much statewide are doing the same things. It's just a matter of changing language to comply with COVID-19 restrictions and compliance.
So just a question, this is more administrative question. Does this get, so we do these policy changes, especially this one here, does this get circulated to the staff? In that there is a new policy or an update of what, because there's quite
Go
a,
in each of the buildings, and the secretary has a book that shows all the changes in policy. I'm not sure if the secretaries tell the staff that they had changes, but all the secretaries have them in the building.
so I guess that's quite, is there a communication that should go, that this is a new policy to the staff? It's lengthy and there's a process. So if they don't know about it, then they don't know. So that's a comment. All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Committee report, safety? Is your microphone on? Ms. New, is your microphone on? People at home can't, though. They want to be able to hear you.
All right. Yes, we met last Thursday, remotely. And basically, we went over some of the common things that we normally do. Fire inspections, again, were conducted in September. Certificates of occupancy, everything was brought up to code, et cetera. There were visual inspection needs to be done by the 31st, 2020, and a walkthrough, and that's got to be submitted by March of 2021. Water testing for the lead, and that's another thing that's basically, again, is pending, and whether or not, again, that whole idea of mitigating issues once it's done. The nurses were all present remotely, which I thought was wonderful. Again, they went back and we went over, for example, the COVID case that had been handled through, again, the administration and through the health department. And the early dismissal on that day, 4/12 by 11 o'clock, and the fact that the health department apparently had made a comment about the fact that, yes, we'd like to plan, but on the other hand, each case as it comes up is unique. And so everything's handled, and I think Mr. Becerra said the same thing, on a case-by-case basis. And that, again, I thought the health department on that Tuesday night when you did your parental, again, virtual meeting, health department was very congratulatory on the district and about how well it went. And by the way, there had been no prior knowledge of that COVID case from the health department, 8:20, I think, or 8 o'clock that morning that it happened. We have a new insurance company and a new insurance agent who was there. Then Nick went over the capital project updates, the capital outlay project, which is basically looking at Robert Street with all classrooms basically having new flooring installed, correct, Mr. Panuccio? Oh.
Yes.
The new flooring in Robert Street?
Yep.
As
the
part of,
capital outlay project.
part of the capital project outlay? And again, just a kind of reminder to everyone that if you've got questions about safety, et cetera, please don't keep it to yourselves, but your first, again, go up the chain of command. First, go through your principals, but if there's something that needs attention, please let everybody know. I don't know that there was anything else other than the fact that, again, people were saying that Mr. Becerra again made the comment about K3, and that we'll be back fully in person by the end of the month, and that we're not compromising capacity or the staff. I basically had said, that the board thanks everybody for everything they've done up until that point, obviously up until today. There were, questions about, some of the questions, and again, that came up about some of the things that are happening and are basically being looked at. Apparently the auditorium, for example, is being used for study halls, making sure that, the welfare of those people who are here is taken care of. And I think that's about it. Is there anything else that I missed?
Could you hear me? Okay. Water testing, it just came out today for the lead testing. It's going to be postponed for 6 months.
Oh.
They just came out with that this afternoon. And then a lot of people were really, praising the cleaners for all the hard work that they've done in keeping all the staff safe and students.
That's it, Mr.
Okay.
Padad.
Thank you. Any other questions for safety? Academic, have you met? No. Okay. Policy, not met. Okay. West facilities.
Better turn this on, right? Is it on? So facilities is prepared to meet tomorrow at 4:30 to discuss the capital project. It was submitted to SED, as we told you in the past. SED has made their comments and has returned it back to the architects for some minor answers that have to be answered by them as well as the construction management. So we're going to get updated on that process tomorrow. It looks good that we'll still be on board to get this thing out to bid early this year, which hopefully by December. I think everybody knows that if we can get something out to bid by December, we should get some very good pricing on the project. There's a lot of hungry people out there looking for work, so that could be very good for our district. So we're looking forward to an update after tomorrow.
Awesome. Any other questions for facilities? All right. Audit. Audit met this evening. As you see, we talked about this with Pat and went through a little bit more than you guys got publicly here, but the great thing about that was it was a positive, no comment, no deficiency report. So that's it's a good thing, and I thank our business officials for making sure that we shine for that. Did I miss anybody? Hear everybody? Any questions on? Okay. Board comment period. Are you?
And our staff that helped myself and the soccer parents put a good senior night on for our kids. Mr. Condon has gone above and beyond, and our staff has gone above and beyond to make our kids be able to enjoy our fall sports. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. I just wanted to publicly thank the administrators for all the work. I know that on the goals, I think, I'm not, and again, I won't speak for the board, but I'll speak for myself. This was something we were looking for. This is what we're expecting. It's definitely in line. You took our criticisms from the past and you definitely moved the bar. So, my opinion, I think you're doing a great job with this, and we look forward to the updates that need to occur. And then I thank everybody here, and also working on, half of our students by November 16th are going to be back in school. You talked about sports. There was a newspaper article, or there's a lot of Facebook noise on the fact that there's some surrounding schools that are not playing sports, and we are. I've been at the field probably half the week I've been down here. People are being compliant for the most part. They are doing what they need to do, and these kids are playing. And that's good overall for our community and for our kids. So I want to thank you for that too. Anybody else? Superintendent's report.
All right, I'll be brief because I've already talked too much tonight. So I would start by saying, though, that along with our administrators, I want to thank all of our staff, because everybody's life has been very different. And people are doing things that they normally haven't had to do. And it's challenging, and there are a lot of curveballs that come very quickly. So I just want to thank all of our staff and really commend them for a great job in being really a steadying, calming influence on our students. And I appreciate that. I think our families appreciate that. We'll continue to try to get better and keep working to do the best job that we can as we get through this process. So a couple of things that are pretty timely, as you know, we are actively searching for a new Southside elementary principal. That deadline, we were pretty aggressive in that the posting had gone out I believe it was 2 weeks ago today. It closed. The posting actually closed today. We're going to try to move aggressively with the goal of having a recommendation for a new principal for appointment at the November board meeting. So a lot's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. We're meeting, Mr. Clancy and I are meeting with the Southside staff, I believe, first thing tomorrow morning to talk more about that process. So there'll be much more to come on that, and we'll obviously keep everyone posted on the progress that we've made. I think there was an excellent response. I didn't see. I'll look to Mrs. Henner. She may have that number of how many applications we had. I know we were well over 20 and maybe beyond that. So we had a very good response. There were a lot of people who were interested in this position.
I don't know the exact.
Okay. So that's a good response. That's a nice response, and we look forward to getting into that process. 32. Well, today was the deadline, so a lot of them probably came in at the 11th hour, so it's a good response. As Mr. Hood noted, we have a facilities committee meeting, a lot of business to take care of, a lot of movement on both our capital outlay project and in the big project that was approved by the taxpayers last December. And so we'll look forward to updating everybody on that. We're getting to the point where this is the exciting time of the, have designed the project, we're working out the last details, and hopefully, we'll get final approval from state ed in the next several weeks. So a lot of updates will be forthcoming on the capital project. And finally, I would also just wanted to note that there's also the next Engage Canastota Education Foundation meeting is tomorrow night at 5:30. And so I think at an upcoming meeting, there will be some updates as that group gets further established and identifies specific priorities that will, and projects that will benefit our students. I think there'll be a lot of good things to talk about resulting from that new organization. And I'll stop talking.
All right, any other questions for the superintendent this evening? Okay. Personnel recommendations, all appointments are pending clearance on fingerprinting. Substitute appointments. Resolved upon the recommendation of superintendent of schools, the board does hereby appoint Sharon Tisch as a interim administrator assigned to Southside Elementary at $450 a day, effective October 1st, 2020. May I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Debbie. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Coaching. Resolved upon the recommendation of superintendent of schools, the board does hereby appoint Francis Camp as a support staff helper in the 2020-21 school year. May I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Other, we're going to hold this off to at the end of our meeting tonight. This is our second and final public comment period, if anybody would like to speak. Okay. Just for the folks at home, if you're watching this, if you can't make it to a meeting, you can submit your questions to the Board of Education email. If we just ask that it's there by noon of the day of the board meeting, and we would address those as though you were here, or at least get you, if not, we would also get you your answer that way. But don't think that you necessarily have to come here. Okay, future dates. November 10th, 2020 is our regular Board of Education meeting at 6:30. I'd entertain a motion to go into executive session to talk about personnel matters and a legal matter.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. We are in executive session. We will be returning out to finalize some other business. All right, we're back from our executive session. We have one more piece of business to take care of. Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the board does hereby appoint the 2020-21 co-curricular assignments as per your attachment in your board packet. May I have a motion? Lauren?
Second.
Tracy? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Anybody else for anything? All right, thank you for attending this evening. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please? Tim?